Welcome to Eat Well, Travel Better, the Business of Food Travel podcast with Eric Wolf and Ashi Vale, where we help you become a better industry professional by gaining inspiration from some of the world's most successful people in the food and beverage tourism industry. With each episode, we meet these leaders and examine their secrets of success. We reveal the obstacles and challenges they have faced, along with their solutions and triumphs, and give you ideas and inspirations for many of the same business issues that you may be facing as well. And now for today's episode. I'm Eric Wolf, and I'll be your host today for episode 22 of Eat Well, Travel Better, the Business of Food Travel podcast. And joining me today is co-host Ashi Vale. Today we'll be speaking with Eric Aebi. In his current position as Program Chair of Hospitality and Tourism Management at Chemeketa Community College and President of Ethos Hospitality and Tourism, Eric's focus is on workforce development in the U.S. state of Oregon as well as abroad. He is an advocate for authentic food tourism experiences that connect guests with local farmers, entrepreneurs, and places to the mutual benefit of all. The ancient Greek philosopher Epicurus became Eric's guiding influence when Eric first heard his words of wisdom, "It's not what we have, but what we enjoy that constitutes our abundance." Eric seeks to create abundance and share it with others. Welcome, Eric.
Thank you for having me. It's great to be here.
Eric, we are so excited to hear from you, especially from someone in the business of hospitality education, which we haven't had before.
Brilliant. Good.
Can you tell us more about Chemeketa Community College and your role there and just your thoughts on hospitality education?
Chemeketa Community College will celebrate its 50th year next year. We offer CTE, or Career Technical Education, and transfer education to students in Oregon that may not be traditional college students. Many are, but many are not. We offer free tuition for scholars in the local high school districts who maintain a GPA of 2.5 or better throughout their college career with us. And the Hospitality and Tourism Management program specifically focuses on that broad career sector in our industry in Oregon, which is the largest employer in the state. So we're one piece of a big chain of people trying to provide trained and educated workforce to this vital industry that's a big engine in the state of Oregon's economy.
Oh, wonderful. Can you tell us how you got into it?
By accident. I've always kind of had a focus on education in the sense of coaching. I had an operational career, and I think my hallmark as a manager was developing people below me in that sense to replace me. I always had the philosophy that I was trying to replace myself, thinking that I would be transitioning to the next step. And so I took that succession planning, if you will, as one of my core responsibilities as an operational manager. And that led into a career transition where I became a mystery shopper. That's a long story, and if you would like me to go into it, I'd be happy to do so. But in so doing, I realized something. As I was out rating guest experiences in some of the finest hotels and resorts around the world for the major brands you would all know, I realized that I didn't truly understand crafting guest experiences, though I had been doing it for a long time. That being that guest in those positions opened my eyes to kind of a deeper relationship that's required to craft those world-class experiences that drive guest loyalty. And then understanding how employee development fits into that, I think gave me an insight that led me further down the path of industrial training and education. And then that attracted the attention of the college administration when they had a change in leadership within the program, and they approached me. So that's kind of the short version.
Now, Eric, you come from a hospitality family as well, don't you?
Oh, I do, yeah. I'm in Portland, Oregon, as I think you mentioned in the intro, and my grandfather emigrated from Switzerland, and he was part of the Ritz Escoffier school chain of talent acquisition that sort of emerged between the Waldorf Astoria Hotel in New York around the turn of the 20th century. He came over to work for Oscar Chersky there under Cesar Ritz's direction, and then ultimately moved to San Francisco to work in a hotel there and be the chef de cuisine, and then up to Portland, where he ran several restaurants through the Depression era, serving haute cuisine in Portland, Oregon, and did catering and all kinds of things. So when I came around in 1965, my grandparents were transitioning out of that but they still had a restaurant, and many of my family members worked there. It was in a home. In fact, it was until recently a restaurant called Amadeus at the Fernwood Inn, Eric, that you may be familiar with. But
Oh, sure.
right, so that home was my dad and his brothers grew up in that house. And then when they went off to college, my grandparents closed the other restaurants and then opened that restaurant and lived on site. And my mom would put me in a bassinet in the coat room, which was the closet off the main entry. And I would literally hear her welcome people to the restaurant as I was falling asleep between meal periods.
Eric, thank you for giving us that update on what you're doing in the hospitality industry. I read that you're interested in ecology as well and the foods that we eat. Tell us a little bit more about the intersection of agriculture and your thoughts and your goals for that.
Thanks for asking that question. It is important to me. Essentially, to me, eating is an agricultural act. You may be familiar with Wendell Berry, who wrote an essay called The Pleasures of Eating, and I will botch his quote, but essentially he said that a great part of the pleasure of eating comes from having a full consciousness of the food chain that led to that meal. So from the soils and the farmers and the producers to the chef through to the service and then to your ultimate consumption of that meal. And I worked for a chef named Greg Higgins in my operational career, who people familiar with the Portland farm to fork movement will know he was a pioneer, really. And Greg taught me that. I mean, he embodied that. Our menus were unique. I'm talking about the mid 80s now. And we literally had to go out to farmers and ask them to grow produce to our specifications, baby carrots instead of 5-pound carrots. And we were looking for essential flavors. And it was there that I encountered sort of the influence of monoculture in agriculture, mm-hmm. and the pressure for farmers to sort of convert away from polyculture and growing multiple crops and things. And so we had to kind of create that economy again. And so what I saw was, I spoke of my grandparents who had restaurants. The sister of my grandmother had a farm up in Sandy near Mount Hood, Oregon, and she supplied a lot of the produce to the restaurant. So I understood this intrinsically, and I didn't realize it was threatened until Greg sort of opened my eyes to it. So that was the germ of that passion for me. And I see it now in Oregon as we're trying to extend the Portland culinary influence that's become international out into the rural areas where these farmers are. And we have a history of land use planning here in Oregon that was designed to maintain farmland, which is great. But how do you get visitors out to the farm for an extended stay to help build value-added agriculture on site direct to the farmer? So how do we create that channel between the farmer and the visitor so that there's fewer intermediaries in that supply chain, so that the bulk of that revenue, if you will, goes to the producers and enables those farms to practice sustainable farming that's profitable and allows their progeny to take over the farm? The thing we're finding in ag in Oregon is that so many of the children of these farmers don't want to do monoculture. They see the thin margins, they see the reliance on seed companies and things, and they just don't, there's not a lot of romance to it, frankly. But having value-added agriculture on site and bringing people to the farm to enjoy those foodstuffs does intrigue them. And so we're trying to work around the legislation and sort of the calcification of that supply chain and figure out how do we amend it to the benefit of visitors, local communities, farmers, and all those stakeholders.
Similar to how Alice Waters championed the farm-to-table movement here in California, are you seeing a lot of that happen in Oregon?
Oh, yeah. Clearly, Alice was probably the pioneer, or the most well-known anyway. And then we saw Greg Higgins pick that up here in Portland, along with many others. Once you start naming names, you leave people out. But Greg was just my conduit to this. I mean, he still runs a fantastic restaurant. If you're ever in Portland, you must go. It's the quintessential plate of Oregon terroir when you eat with Greg. So yes, certainly Alice and Chez Panisse was instrumental in this. And there are others. There's a great book by David S. Kemp called The United States of Arugula that really points out that prior to the 1950s, post-World War II manufacturing approach to food that gave America TV dinners and Kraft macaroni and cheese, we were a farm to table. That's all we were. Everybody ate farm to table mostly. And you could buy produce in grocery stores that were just from the valley down the road here. That all sort of imploded, and now we're bringing it back. So I look at it more as we're just rediscovering what we always were.
Eric, you talked a little bit about, or you asked the question rather, if travel experiences can give a better understanding of industry and prosperity. And I think back to the time in Oregon and seeing people driving into the Willamette Valley and visiting the wineries and going to farms and so on. But I think at the same time, it's a bit of a double-edged sword, because the challenge is that the more people that come, the more strain there is on the system, the more resources are being used, the more pollution and waste there is. So is it actually destroying the authenticity, the very thing that made Oregon so special in the first place?
Well, Eric, that's what you have to manage, right? I mean, that is the challenge. How do you sustain as much of that authenticity as you can, and yet foster that economic development that allows the authenticity to remain? I may be being obtuse there, but what I mean is, if we don't bring the visitor to these experiences, there may not be enough commerce there to maintain and sustain them. They need one another. Furthermore, with the press we're getting, they're coming anyway, Eric. I don't know that you can stop them. I'll give you 2 examples. The community college I work for has a satellite campus in McMinnville, which is the heart of the Willamette Valley wine growing region. There's an airport out there that was a commercial freight airport. It didn't have any public air service into it. They would land 747s out there and take agricultural products overseas. Every day I drive out there now, well, every week I drive out there, there's at least one Gulfstream jet on the tarmac that's bringing somebody very wealthy up to buy a piece of land, to plant land, grapes, or to buy an existing winery. The transition is happening. My concern is that we don't manage it. And if we don't manage it well, we'll become what other wine growing regions have become and are now trying to fix. So that's my approach to it, I think, is it's somewhat inevitable. Let's make it work.
Sure, you can't put the toothpaste back in the tube, but I think that it is changing the very character of Oregon's culinary scene, the very reasons why chefs would come there in the early days, and why people sought our produce and even exported a lot of that to other areas. Those very reasons for being special are now being challenged. And I honestly don't know what the solution is in terms of management, or how to direct this kind of economic development without jeopardizing the system.
Yeah, well, I think there's policy and there are economic forces that can help. So from the policy standpoint, if we make sure that we are taxing visitors so that we have a supply of funds into the future to help foster the development that needs to occur between industry sectors, that's the hard part to fund. So I'm thinking of the infrastructure that can help reduce pollution and impact. Also, though, if we can sell more of you mentioned exports. You know, when I was a kid, we used to have Dungeness crab every year for Christmas Eve. Every year it was tradition. Well,
wow, you were lucky, Eric.
I know, right? Just one of the joys of living here. But now the season starts later and later because of the exports to international markets, because that crab is now so prized. And this year we couldn't even have it at New Year's. So I'm wondering next year, is it Valentine's Day? But if we can sell more of those products to visitors in situ here in Oregon, then we're exporting less. And that reduces pollution, and infrastructure pressure. So I think it's a challenge. It's going to remain. Aside from visitors, our population is just exploding here. So I guess my theory is, let's try and turn the people on who are moving here to what's authentic about here, so that the experiences and the agricultural products can stay here and still deliver the economic sustainability that's required for the processors and producers here.
I've never understood why destinations exported their best products. I mean, okay, if you have so much of something that there's no reason but to export, okay, I get that. But there is a limited supply of Oregon Dungeness crab. You can't build it in a factory. So yeah, I don't know. I agree with you 100%, because that gives people a reason to come. If you can only get that Dungeness crab in Oregon, Let's keep it
There
in
you go.
state, and prices will go up accordingly, and the restaurants will make money, the farms and fishermen will make money. I don't know. It
Agreed.
seems like a better solution.
There's one aspect, and that's perishability and fragility of products. I'll give you an example. Eric, I don't know if you recall the Oregon strawberry of myth and legend.
Yes, of course.
Right? So nowadays, though, the shelf stability of those strawberries can be minutes. I mean, as a kid, they would be so ripe and so full of sugar and juice that we would essentially just eat them off the U-pick vine. But you could get them home, but just the weight of the berries on top of one another would start to macerate them, and they would even begin to ferment if you left them out for a while because they were so ripe. They have now GMO mutated. I don't know what they've done, but they have changed the species to try and bring some stability to that. And you can't find that strawberry anymore.
No, when I first moved to Oregon in, I guess, 2001, I remember that strawberry, but the strawberries that are being sold the past couple of years, they're not the same strawberry at all.
No, they're not. Fortunately, though, kind of back to our theme here, there are farmers out there who are going away from that sort of ag and saying, nope, I'm going to grow native species here, and I'm going to find ways to use that product. So I'm going to go work with specialty ice cream makers, chocolatiers, distillers. So people who are making shelf-stable products and who value that flavor profile. But that takes entrepreneurs and vision and a certain amount of financial funding support and lending and things that have to come from public-private partnerships.
This reminds me of, quite sure you guys know, but mangoes to Indians are very sacred. And
Yes.
growing up, my memory of an Alfonso mango, just the smell from a mile away and the juice that drips down your elbow as you eat it. It's one of those things that was one of the only redeeming factors of summer in India, because it gets so hot. We wait anxiously for the Alfonso mango to be ripe in May. And I recently bought a box from the grocery store here. They've imported Alfonso mangoes. And I was so looking forward to it. And I was just a little disappointed because, I couldn't smell that fragrance, and it was delicious, but it just didn't have that same oomph. And it's because they were shipped when they were still green in a box of hay, and half of them, the mangoes were spoiled, and it was just so sad to me. But what's exciting to see is that now, even we have experiences where just in that period where they ripen in India, we have like a mango dining experience.
Perfect.
Or some of our hosts offer that. And it's wonderful to be able to do that, because I know they would export it to get more money, to make it more worth their while. But it's so great to see that now Indians are using the mango to showcase it at home, where it is the best. It's never going to taste as good as it does in India when it's, a few days off from the tree.
I have tried mango in India, and I know what you mean. I come back here and there's just no mango like that I'm ever going to eat again, unless I go back to India.
Yeah, I hear you, Eric. Someone said the other day they didn't like mangoes, and I was like,
oh, they don't know what a mango is.
Haven't had an Indian mango.
That's right. That's right.
So, Eric, where are you off to next? I was reading in your bio, I think you've been to, 70-something countries?
Yeah, 73 countries. I decided to count them because my students were asking me. I have a map in my office. I guess it's a bit of a ego wall for me, but it's also just to open their eyes and their horizons to what this industry can do. And that's really what drives me, Eric. I come from modest background where my family all immigrated to this country, and they were working people, and many of them worked with the land. I was not the best student in the world. I was not focused on it. There were childhood drama that sort of came to me at an early childhood age. And my way out of it was escaping to that restaurant. As I began to learn where my grandparents came from, I began to have a fascination with those destinations. And I knew probably from the age of 10 that I remember saying to myself, before I get married, before I have children, I want to see the world. And that was the most important thing to me. I studied French instead of math, which is probably the worst idea in the world, because I thought that would get me into a kitchen, and the association with France and food was strong in my environment. I took a position in France that allowed me to learn cooking in Alsace with a Michelin chef, introduced to me by Greg Higgins. I then took a position at a hotel in Switzerland. I had wanted to go to the hotel school in Lausanne, but it was out of my price range. So I took an apprenticeship position at a Swiss hotel beautiful 5-star Relais and Chateau property on Lake Lucerne. I learned Garridone service, how to tranchier chicken and sole at tableside. And so I learned that tradition. And then while I was there, an American guest came through, turned out to be the owner of the mystery shopping company that I later went to work for. And he pulled me out after the visit and said, if you ever want a job, let me know. I was 24 years old. I was the youngest guy he ever hired. And from there, then I would get every month. I moved to Vienna. I met my future wife, and I was based in the Wachau Valley where they grow Gruner Veltliner grapes. And every month I would get a packet of tickets and an assignment to go stay at hotels and resorts and draft reports. And so I had seen 50 countries by the time I was 30. And then later I did work for Marriott and Hyatt in executive education, and that took me to the remaining countries. About 3 years ago, I turned 50, and the joys of airplane travel diminished for me. And my wife said, I'd like to see you a little more. So I've kind of slowed down on the international side from a working standpoint, but we'll always go to Austria and Switzerland to visit family and relatives. I have a cousin in the UK, so we go there. So that will be the next trip, probably with a side. I want to do about a month in Belgium and explore beer and cuisine there.
An excellent culinary destination. Good choice.
And underappreciated, I think.
I think that's true, definitely. Gosh, you can't get a better cherry beer than in Belgium.
No doubt. Yeah,
very nice.
I look forward to that.
Hey, you talked a little bit, well, you touched on rather a little bit about a challenging moment in your youth. And you also mentioned that you're working on a project that could help other lost youthful souls. Do you want to go into that a little bit?
The American education system is quite different than, say, the European education system. And one of the benefits, I think, of the European education system is it kind of takes everybody up through grade 10 on the same track. And then from there, you make some choices. We don't do that in the US. There's an assumption that everyone will go to a 4-year college. And for a lot of reasons nowadays, that's becoming less appealing to people. And so we get a lot of kids who hit that grade 10 mark that just sort of seems to be a biological determinant age. And they say, hey, I don't want to go to a 4-year college. So why am I finishing these last 2 years of high school? And so we're seeing dropout rates increase, and kind of youth that are trying to build an alternative pathway that, frankly, we should be building for them. So the path I mentioned, where I did go to the 4-year college and didn't know why I was doing it and waited tables to pay for that, and then took my apprenticeship in Switzerland, we're trying to pull that apprenticeship back down to that about 16, 17 years old age here. And the National Restaurant Association, the American Hotel and Lodging Association, have an educational institute that provides now registered apprenticeships to the U.S. Department of Labor. And so they have programming. What they don't have is work sites and educational centers everywhere to deliver that programming. So I saw that vacuum for us. And at Chemeketa, because we're in wine country, we have a working vineyard, wine cellar, and a wine label and a tasting room. And it just occurred to me that we could expand that into the event management side, the food service side. And ultimately, I'd like to build a hotel on site out there so that we can deliver the lodging apprenticeship as well. Because in my seat, I see high school kids who don't see a pathway. They think of our industry as being long hours with abusive managers, and you work holidays away from home. And I see employers calling me saying, Eric, I need help. I need talent. I need people. Where are they? That's where I excel. I get in the middle of that, and I just find ways to make connections and find those forces that are looking for each other, just knit that fabric together. So that's the project. We're hopeful of having that up and going by next fall.
It's a really important project, Eric. You're in some ways a guidance counselor, right? To make sure these children and these students graduate and find the jobs that are their dreams.
Yeah. And here's the shocking thing. I blame our industry, frankly. We do not promote the value of our careers in this country. So when I look at the labor market data for the state of Oregon, I can demonstrate that there are more positions at what we consider a living wage in our industry in the rural and urban areas of Oregon than any other industry in the state. So what's the disconnect? These people, ultimately, we draw people to the industry through happenstance. But if we can build that pipeline, we're going to keep kids away from influences that maybe aren't the best for them, first of all. We're going to allow those families to stay in these rural communities where they've been for generations and want their kids to stay. To me, that's almost cultural heritage that you're preserving now at that point. I may be self-aggrandizing my own mission, but that's where the passion comes from for me. Being able to tick 2 or 3 boxes at once that all seem to be healthy.
And what are some of those ideas that you've had to better connect graduating students with the jobs that will be fulfilling for them?
Well, we've got to overcome that perception of the industry as being one of drudgery. Sometimes I'll talk to students about the restaurant industry, and they act as if we're talking about the coal mines in a Charles Dickens novel, in Birmingham or something. But there has been some of that history there. We need to treat employees better. And when we talk about awareness of and preservation of food supply chains, we're now starting to see attention focus on the employees in the kitchen who are working, sometimes undocumented workers. Are they being treated well? We have to do that. We have to increase the wage for those folks that are in those back of the house positions to make them sustainable. The number one business for newly immigrated families is food entrepreneurship. So we need to get funding sources to them, business planning sources to them. And oh, by the way, they're the ones that bring their food traditions with them to us and create these experiences that we rave about and cherish. So we've got to do the right thing early on there. And so part of it is just getting into the high schools and telling that story of the opportunity to either stay at home and raise your family where your parents raised you, or see the world. And this industry can do that.
I wanted to give a shout out to business here that's doing that. It's called La Cocina, where they give immigrants the opportunity to really showcase their culinary and cultural heritage. And I think
Brilliant.
It's fantastic. While we're on the topic of industry concerns and where you see it going, can you talk a little bit about, what you're seeing as a trend of homogenization of travel? Yeah, we'd love to hear more about your thoughts on that.
I don't think I'm alone in this concern, and I'd like to hear your thoughts on it, frankly. So when I first started traveling internationally in the early 90s, I did a lot of work behind what we called the Iron Curtain in my era growing up here. So Eastern Europe. What was happening is all the hotels were state-run businesses in those countries up till 89, 90, 91. And the Western lodging companies were trying to expand their global presence by putting flags on all these businesses. So behind the scenes, they were trying to work out management contracts with government ownership and how they were going to do that. My job on the ground was to go through and do an assessment of the facilities and the product service offering and define the gap between the Western standard and the current standard, if there was a gap, or to slot these properties into maybe a classification. Is it a 2-star, a 3-star? Does it have the potential to be a 4 or 5? Those kind of things. And so when I was traveling around the world in those days before the smartphone, it was adventure. I'm telling you, there were harrowing cab rides. You couldn't get Google to translate in Romanian, take me to the Intercontinental Hotel, please. You had to exchange currency everywhere. You hit the ground in a destination. There was nobody there with a sign that said your name. So some of that travel experience, I think that adventure of travel is gone. Now you travel, you've already seen your hotel room on your smartphone before you get there. You can translate your request to a cab driver in Beijing through your phone. And it's made it easier, yes, but I think it's stripped away some of the daring do, if you will, of that experience. So that's one aspect of it. But the other aspect is all the Western chains rushed into these destinations. So I was never more depressed in my life than to finally see the Great Pyramids of Giza. And the view you always see in the books and on television is this expanse of desert sweeping out to the horizon and these pyramids. Well, if you've been there, you know that if you do a 180 and turn around, what you see is KFC, Pizza Hut, McDonald's, and 7-Eleven. It's depressing.
Ugh.
It shattered me. And it's everywhere. The first time I went to Hong Kong, I was just so blown away by the street food and stuff. Well, now they've moved a lot of those vendors into food halls, and Mario Batali's got a restaurant there, or someone else. And you have to go seek out these hawker stalls that used to be the only thing available. And so I lament that.
What you're talking about really is the cultural homogenization, and this is a really serious issue. I joke with people that when I travel, I don't want to eat big multinational burger chains
Mm,
or multinational coffee, and I also don't want to travel to Italy to eat Chinese food, you know?
no,
And it just seems like everyone wants to have everything in every destination, and then all of a sudden, if you do, then there's no reason to travel anymore.
that's right. That's right. I know it's a shame. What concerns me is that young people traveling now won't know what it was, so they don't know what they're missing.
Yeah.
But Eric, I think this is our opportunity, and Ashi, I think it's our opportunity to do what you have seen for so long. Is this, how do we preserve this authenticity? How do we make it relevant? How do we promote it without killing it? And those are profound questions, and I'm glad we've got people like you working on it.
And Eric, if you wouldn't mind sharing what the French chef who trained you told you, I thought that was an interesting way to look at it.
Oh, yeah. Alsace is a region in eastern France bordering Germany, and it's a wine growing region. It has a climate similar to ours here in Oregon. So the summer months come and go with all the tourists, and then it's winter. And as a restaurateur there, you've got to make your living off the locals. I wrote the quote in our interview, and so correct me if I miss an aspect of it. I don't. But he said essentially the most important job of a chef is to make the soup du jour interesting. Because if you can do that, you can get local guests to come back to your restaurant multiple times a week or multiple times a month. I think the soup du jour is an afterthought 90% of the time. But if you can take the interest and forage, as Alice Waters would say, to find those unique ingredients. And I remember him making soup out of cardoons that were available at a shoulder season one time, and people would come in for the cardoon potage. I don't think you'll find that in any recipe book on foodnetworks.com.
Although the first time I ever had cardoons was in Oregon, so go figure.
Wow, a random cardoon connection.
I know,
Who'd have thunk it?
That's very weird. Hey, when we were talking before, you mentioned an inspirational quote, which is actually my favorite quote as well, and I sign all my email signatures with it. And I think
Oh,
it's words to live by. Would you mind sharing that with our audience?
I would be happy to. I think you're talking about the Twain quote.
Indeed.
Indeed, yeah, it's a good one. Let me pull it up. Travel is fatal to prejudice, bigotry, and narrow-mindedness.
Absolutely. I've always said travel is the best education, and it truly is to get people, well, today now, to get them off of their phones and actually out
Yeah,
into the cities or to actually visit countries. That's the best
that's the thing.
education we can really, the best legacy we can offer.
And I wish I could make his quote better. I think food is really the passport to that. I can't tell you how many times I was traveling alone back in those days of the 90s and in some dubious locations where there was some concern and I was anxious, but I always made a connection. I would study the cuisine before I got there, just out of my own interest, because I would say, okay, I'm going to Zaire, or I'm going to, well, now the Democratic Republic of the Congo, or I'm going to Gabon, or I'm going to Romania. What are the foods there? What do I need to eat while I'm there so I have that food memory I can reproduce? I would find that I would get into the cab or find the first person I could communicate with and say, where's a good place to get this dish? And all of that sort of genetic sort of distrust or fear that you can get between strangers in travel, just it melts away. Because you've made a connection now, and you've made a connection that is so deep within all of us, because those food memories are our initial memories. There are traditions around our family and our culture. So if you have a unique and express interest in that and learning of that, you're now just not some interloper coming to leave a few dollars behind and maybe be judgmental about the culture and how it's different than yours or what have you. You're now somebody who's interested, a traveler who has come with the best intentions.
Thank you for sharing that, Eric. We couldn't agree more. I
Thank
did
you.
want to ask you to share with our audience your thoughts on zero-sum thinking and the New Yorker cartoon. I thought that was quite hilarious.
I think humanity is there's an author, Yuval Noah Harari, who wrote a brilliant book called Sapiens a few years back, and he's got a new one out now, 21 Lessons for the 21st Century. He's such a brilliant thinker. And he made me realize in Sapiens just how much change the human species is undergoing right now. It is a pace of change unlike any other. And I think it's affecting us mentally, spiritually, psychically, and physically. Some for the good, some for the bad. In terms of the bad, I think it's enabling within us sort of these evolutionary tendencies to be suspicious and fearful of change. And when we're suspicious and fearful, we have a tendency to not assume the best intentions of others initially. We have a tendency towards defense, protection, security over liberty, those kind of things. And I think that's being manifest in some of the nationalist politics we see globally now. In other words, it's a natural reaction to fear. And I think in that kind of a playing field, zero-sum thinking comes to the fore. I've got to get mine before they get theirs. And I think it happens between governments and between individuals. So this zero-sum thinking rather than the win-win sort of approach that kind of comes more naturally to my mind. And I thought this New Yorker cartoon that you referenced brilliantly shows it in one frame. New Yorker cartoons are one frame, and they're so poignant sometimes. But it shows a cocktail bar. It looks like Manhattan. Two dogs well-dressed in suits, tailored suits, drinking martinis at the bar. And the caption reads to the cartoon, "It's not enough that we win. Cats must lose also."
I love it.
And unfortunately, I think it defines our time a little too much right now.
Well, Eric, you talked a lot about fear, and I think that food can really break down those walls of fear. I've been in some dining situations in the past where, one in Korea in particular, where my colleagues didn't speak much English at all. I spoke no Korean, and our entire interaction was around the food at the table. And they could see which foods I liked, which foods I didn't like. They wanted to please me. We would smile, we would laugh, and we still communicated. And that's really what gastrodiplomacy is all about. And sometimes I've thought if we could just get all the world leaders in a hotel banquet room and ply them with food and alcohol and lock the doors for a week, we'd either have world peace or we'd have we wouldn't have to worry about those leaders anymore.
Right,
we'd have to find new ones.
See, that's a win-win solution, Eric, right there. Couldn't
Always
agree
thinking.
more.
Well, Eric, let's go ahead and wrap up for today, but I wanted to thank you very much for taking the time to share your experience and your knowledge with our audience. You have a unique background, and it was very interesting hearing your take on things and bringing back those fantastic Oregon memories. So thank you.
Thanks for letting me share.
Thank you so much, Eric. It was a real pleasure having you on the podcast.
Thanks for listening today. The Eat Well, Travel Better podcast is brought to you by the World Food Travel Association, the world's leading authority on food and beverage tourism. We empower local communities and businesses with the food and beverage tourism knowledge and tools needed to reach new consumers and gain a competitive edge. Founded in 2003, every year we shepherd a community of almost 100,000 professionals in over 100 countries. Connect with us on Facebook, Twitter, LinkedIn, and Instagram. And you can learn more about us, subscribe to our newsletter, and join our family at worldfoodtravel.org. Until next time, eat well and travel better.